I want to start today by taking you to a hotel room in Cannes, France. The date is April 13th, 1888.
Right.
It's this mild spring morning. A man is sitting at his breakfast table. He's sipping his coffee, and he unfolds the morning newspaper.
Just a normal routine.
Exactly. He's looking for the news of the day, perhaps checking the stock markets or the diplomatic cables. But then his eyes catch a headline that basically stops his heart cold.
It's the kind of moment that really belongs in a Gothic horror novel.
Yeah.
I mean, the headline is right there in French. Le marchand de la mort est mort.
The merchant of death is dead.
Yeah.
And as he reads on, the article just proceeds to totally eviscerate the man's life. It describes him as a monster, a man who amassed a fortune by finding ways to kill more people faster than ever before.
It actually celebrates his demise.
It does. The only problem is the man reading the obituary is the man the obituary is about.
It is the ultimate existential crisis. The man sitting there is Alfred Nobel. The newspaper had basically mistaken him for his brother, Ludwig, who had actually just passed away in Cannes. But for Alfred, this was a glimpse into a future that was already written. He was seeing his legacy in real time, and it was ugly.
That moment is the real fulcrum of our deep dive today. We're looking at the paradox of Alfred Nobel. Because, everyone knows the name. It's synonymous with the prize.
Right, the absolute pinnacle of human achievement in peace, science, literature.
But almost nobody knows the man who sat in that hotel room, horrified by the realization that the world saw him as a literal villain.
And that's really the mission of this deep dive. We aren't just reciting a biography here from the source material. We're unpacking a massive transformation. We want to figure out how the 19th century's most prolific manufacturer of explosives, a man whose inventions literally reshaped the geography of the earth and the lethality of warfare. How does that guy become the patron saint of peace?
It's a story about chemistry, sure, but it's really a story about redemption. We have a massive stack of source transcripts today, covering his life from the freezing winters of Stockholm in 1833 all the way to the sunny coast of San Remo in 1896.
It covers a lot of ground.
It really does. We're going to get into the technical nitty-gritty of nitroglycerin, the brutal legal battles over patents, and the three women who shaped his very lonely life.
And we have to remember the context for all of this. I mean, we're talking about the 19th century.
Right.
The Industrial Revolution is just roaring. Nations are modernizing at a terrifying speed. Nobel isn't just a participant in this. He is the fuel.
So let's go back to the start, the foundation. We're in Stockholm, 1833. Alfred is born on October 21st. And if we look at the Nobel family, it seems like volatility is a genetic trait, not just a chemical one.
Absolutely. To understand Alfred, you really have to understand his father, Emmanuel Nobel.
Yeah, Emmanuel was a fascinating guy.
He was a force of nature. He's an architect, an inventor, an engineer, but he was also prone to these massive cycles of boom and bust.
He was the kind of man who would build a huge suspension bridge one year and then completely go bankrupt the next.
And he did go bankrupt. The family was totally destitute for a while.
It's interesting when you're looking at the sources, how crucial Alfred's mother, Henriette, was during these times.
Oh, she was the anchor.
Yeah, while Emmanuel was off chasing his next big idea or, running from creditors, she was the one actually keeping the family of 8 children alive.
She was the stabilizer. And that is actually a perfect metaphor for what Alfred would do later with chemistry.
Oh, that's a great point.
Right. Emmanuel was the volatile explosive. Henriette was the inert substance that kept the house from blowing up. She actually came from a wealthy family originally, but she scrubbed floors and worked as a cashier just to keep them fed.
Eventually, Emmanuel's luck does turn. He moves to St. Petersburg, Russia, and he starts manufacturing landmines and naval mines for the Tsar.
Which is a huge shift.
It's a crucial detail for you to keep in mind because it means Alfred didn't just stumble into explosives out of nowhere. He grew up in a house where how to blow things up was basically dinner table conversation.
Exactly. By the time the rest of the family joins Emmanuel in Russia in 1842, the Nobels are becoming really serious players in the Russian military-industrial complex.
Alfred is only 9 years old at this point.
9 years old. And he's entering this world of immense privilege, but also immense pressure.
And his education definitely reflects that. He didn't just go to a public school. The Nobels hired top-tier private tutors.
The best money could buy.
Right. And this is where we see the first real crack in the scientist mold. Because Alfred was brilliant at chemistry, yes, but he was arguably even more gifted at languages and literature.
He was an absolute sponge. I mean, by the time he was 17, he was completely fluent in Swedish, Russian, French, English, and German.
5 languages.
5. And I don't mean tourist fluent where you can order a coffee.
Oh.
I mean, he could read dense scientific papers, draft complex legal contracts, and write poetry in all of them.
The poetry part is so fascinating to me because he loved the English Romantics. He was reading Shelley, Byron. He wrote pages and pages of this deeply melancholic verse.
He actually wanted to be a writer.
He really did.
He had this very sensitive, almost depressive soul from a young age. He even called himself a misanthrope in his teenage years.
But Emmanuel Nobel was having absolutely none of it.
No, not at all. Emmanuel looked at his son and essentially said, poetry doesn't build bridges, and it doesn't sink ships.
The classic parental block. Put down the pen, pick up the beaker.
Precisely. Emmanuel needed engineers to run this growing family empire. So he sent Alfred on a grand tour of sorts, but not to look at Renaissance art.
Right, he sent him to learn chemistry and engineering.
And this trip took him to Paris in 1850, which is where the story of the Nobel Prize actually begins, chemically speaking.
Paris in 1850 was the absolute center of the chemical world. And this is where Alfred meets a man named Ascanio Sobrero.
Ascanio Sobrero is one of those names that often gets lost in the history books. But he is the man who actually discovered nitroglycerin 3 years earlier in 1847.
He was an Italian chemist.
Yes. And when Alfred met him, Sobrero was actually terrified of his own invention.
Right. Sobrero called it pyroglycerin initially and basically warned everyone in the scientific community to stay away from it.
He had physical scars on his face from explosions in his own lab. He thought the substance was totally useless because it was just way too dangerous.
And he wasn't wrong. Let's break down the chemistry here a little bit because you really need to understand what Alfred was up against.
It's vital context.
So nitroglycerin is this oily, colorless liquid. And at a molecular level, you have nitrogen and oxygen atoms bonded together in a state of extreme tension.
They want to break apart. They want to become gas.
Yeah.
And they want to do it right now.
It's essentially a tightly compressed spring made of
A
atoms.
very sensitive spring. If you just drop a beaker of it, explosion. If you heat it up slightly too much, explosion. If you shake it too hard, explosion.
It's terrifying.
It really is. It has a detonation velocity that makes black powder look like a joke. Because black powder, gunpowder, it burns very fast. But nitroglycerin actually detonates. It creates a supersonic shockwave.
So Sobrero says to young Alfred, this stuff is a total nightmare. But Alfred, being 18 years old and perhaps a bit reckless, looks at it and thinks, I can fix this.
He saw the utility. You have to remember what the world was doing at this exact time. The world was digging.
Right. The Industrial Revolution.
Exactly. They were building mines, railway tunnels, canals, and they were hitting hard rock that traditional black powder just couldn't break
It
efficiently.
was too slow and too weak.
Yes. So the industrial demand for a true high explosive was massive. Alfred believed that if he could just solve the safety issue, he would literally hold the keys to the future of global construction.
He also travels to the United States during this time, spends some time studying with John Erickson.
The guy who designed the USS Monitor ironclad later on.
That's the one. And then he returns to Stockholm to work in his father's factory. He is completely obsessed. He is trying to tame the untamable.
And this is where the major tragedy hits. We are in 1864 now.
The family is back in Sweden.
Right. The Nobel family has returned to Sweden because their business in Russia really suffered after the Crimean War ended.
Because no war means no demand for naval mines.
Exactly. Which led to yet another bankruptcy for Emmanuel. So they are back in Stockholm, and they're experimenting in this small shed at a place called Hellenborg.
They are trying to mass produce raw nitroglycerin, and on September 3rd, 1864, the shed explodes.
It wasn't just a small pop. It was a massive, devastating detonation. It killed 5 people instantly.
And one of them was Emil Nobel, Alfred's younger brother.
Yes. Emil was only 21 years old.
This is the moment where I think almost anyone else would quit. I mean, you were playing with a substance that just killed your little brother. The guilt must have been absolutely crushing.
The sources suggest Alfred was devastated, deeply traumatized. But he was also oddly detached in his practical response.
He didn't stop.
He didn't. In fact, he was back to work almost immediately. Now, the city of Stockholm was terrified, understandably. They completely banned him from experimenting within the city limits.
So what does he do? He actually moves his lab to a barge out on Lake Mälaren.
Right. He is literally floating on a lake, mixing the most dangerous substance on planet Earth, simply because he has nowhere else to go.
Striking image.
But this tragedy, it fundamentally changed his focus. He realized that the safety of the explosive wasn't just a nice feature to have, it was the entire product.
He wasn't selling the boom anymore. He had to sell the control.
Exactly. And this leads directly to the eureka moment, the invention of dynamite in 1867.
The mythology always says he just accidentally dropped a vial and it didn't explode because it happened to land in some sawdust.
Right, the happy accident myth.
But the reality from the source transcripts is much more scientific and deliberate. He was systematically testing absorbent materials for months.
He tried everything. Charcoal, brick dust, sawdust.
He wanted something that would soak up the liquid nitroglycerin like a sponge so it wouldn't slosh around.
And he finally found Kieselguhr.
Yes, diatomaceous earth.
It's basically fossilized algae. And if you look at it under a microscope, it looks like a microscopic honeycomb. It's incredibly porous.
So when he mixed the raw liquid nitroglycerin with this powdery clay-like earth, it absorbed it and turned into a paste.
And the absolute magic of the paste is that you can mold it.
Not just mold it into shapes. You can drop it. You can hit it with a heavy hammer. You can even light it on fire, and it will just burn slowly without actually detonating.
It made the explosive shock insensitive.
But that raises the big question. If it's insensitive, how do you actually make it blow up when you want it to?
That is the second and arguably much more important part of Nobel's invention, the blasting cap.
Right.
He developed a specialized detonator using mercury fulminate, which is a much smaller, highly sensitive explosive. You use that small shock to trigger the bigger, stable explosive.
It was a two-part system, the Nobel igniter.
This changed everything. Suddenly, you could safely transport high explosives on a bumpy train. You could shift them across the ocean on a boat.
And the name he chose was just brilliant marketing, dynamite.
Coming from the Greek word dynamis, meaning power.
It sounds modern, it sounds scientific, and most importantly, it sounds safe.
It was an instant global revolution. Projects like the St. Gothard Tunnel in the Alps or the massive removal of Hellgate rocks in New York Harbor. None of this happens without dynamite.
Alfred Nobel became one of the richest men in the entire world almost overnight.
But he didn't just stop there and retire. His mind was relentlessly restless. He kept refining the chemistry. And in 1875, he invents gelignite.
Often referred to in the sources as the jelly.
Yes. The story goes he had cut his finger in the lab and was using collodion to cover the wound.
Which is a nitrocellulose solution, basically like a liquid skin bandage.
Right, and he couldn't sleep that night because of the throbbing pain in his finger. So he went back down to the lab and thought, what happens if I mix this collodion with raw nitroglycerin?
And the result was this transparent, gelatinous explosive.
Exactly, gelignite. And it was completely waterproof, which dynamite actually wasn't.
Because dynamite could sort of sweat out the nitroglycerin in wet conditions.
Yes, the liquid would seep out of the clay, pooling at the bottom of the box, which made it incredibly dangerous all over again.
But gelignite stayed perfectly stable even underwater. It was the perfect tool for the mining industry.
Then comes the third major leap, and this is where we really start sliding toward that merchant of death label, the invention of ballistite.
This is around 1887.
Up until now, all military guns and cannons used standard black powder. And when fired, it created massive, thick clouds of white smoke.
So in a huge battle, after the very first volley of fire, you literally couldn't see the enemy anymore.
You were essentially firing blind into a fog.
So Nobel sets out to invent a smokeless propellant.
He figures out how to combine nitroglycerin and nitrocellulose in a very specific ratio, adding about 10% camphor.
And it burned completely cleanly.
No smoke at all. This changed warfare on a tactical level completely. Now, snipers could fire without revealing their hidden positions. Artillery batteries could keep firing all day with perfectly clear lines of sight.
And this brings us to the patents and power section of our deep dive. Nobel ended up holding 355 different patents. He wasn't just a brilliant inventor anymore, he was a corporate shark.
Well, he really had to be. His life became this constant, exhausting stream of lawsuits. People were constantly trying to steal his formulas and his methods.
There was a massive, highly publicized legal battle in England specifically over ballistite.
The British government effectively took his idea, tweaked the formula just slightly, called their version cordite, and flat out refused to pay him any royalties.
That must have made him incredibly bitter.
It deeply embittered him. He felt totally betrayed by the scientific community and the governments he felt he was serving. He famously noted in a letter, "There is no use in having a good idea if you don't have a good lawyer."
So we have this picture of a man who is professionally just utterly dominant, but personally he is completely besieged. Let's pivot to his private life now. Because for a man who connected the entire world through railway tunnels and mining canals, he was incredibly isolated.
They called him the wealthy vagabond.
That's such a sad nickname.
It is. He didn't really have a home. He lived in luxury hotels, overnight trains, and in laboratories. He was a deeply lonely bachelor his entire life.
There were 3 women who really impacted his life, though. Let's look at the first one, Alexandra.
She was a Russian girl from his youth in St. Petersburg. He fell deeply in love, he proposed, and she completely rejected him.
It's a classic trope, the early heartbreak.
But for a sensitive, poetic soul like Alfred, that rejection really seemed to confirm his darkest suspicion that he was fundamentally unlovable. He just threw himself entirely into his lab work as a coping mechanism.
But the second woman, this is arguably the most important relationship of his entire life, even though it wasn't romantic in the traditional sense. Bertha von Suttner.
This is such a fascinating story. In 1876, Nobel was feeling particularly lonely while living in Paris, so he actually puts an ad in the newspaper.
I read this in the source. It's amazing.
It read, "Wealthy, highly educated elderly gentleman seeks lady of mature age, versed in languages, as secretary and supervisor of household."
He called himself an elderly gentleman. He was only 43 years old.
I know, but he felt old. His physical health was always very poor. He suffered from chronic migraines, digestion issues, and deep depression. So Bertha Kinsky, who was an Austrian countess who had fallen on very hard financial times, she answers the ad.
And she comes to Paris.
She does. And they hit it off immediately. They were complete intellectual equals.
But she didn't stay working for him long at all.
No. She worked for him for about a week, maybe 2, before suddenly eloping with her secret fiancé, Arthur von Suttner.
But, and this is the absolute key to the Nobel story, she and Alfred remained close friends for the rest of his life.
They wrote hundreds of intense philosophical letters to each other over the decades.
And Bertha actually became one of the world's most famous and vocal peace activists.
She wrote a book called Lay Down Your Arms, which was essentially the Uncle Tom's Cabin of the 19th century peace movement. She was a radical pacifist. And she constantly challenged Alfred.
She would write these letters to him saying, how can you possibly justify making these horrific weapons?
And what was his defense? This is where the paradox of the man really shines through.
His defense was a concept that we today would call mutually assured destruction.
Exactly. He told her point blank, "My factories may make an end of war sooner than your peace congresses."
He genuinely thought that.
He wrote, "The day when 2 army corps can annihilate each other in 1 second, all civilized nations will recoil with horror and disband their troops."
He honestly thought he was making war so uniquely terrible that it would become logically impossible to wage it.
He was wrong, of course. World War I would soon prove that nations would not recoil in horror. They would just feed millions of young men into the industrial grinder.
But he genuinely believed in peace through extreme deterrence, whereas Bertha believed in peace through total disarmament, and they argued about this core philosophy for decades.
And then there was the third woman in his life, Sophie Hess.
A very, very different type of relationship.
Completely different. She was a young Austrian woman, much younger than him.
Yeah.
He met her in a flower shop.
It was a very transactional relationship in many ways.
It was. He set her up in nice apartments. He supported her financially, but he was always deeply ashamed of her.
Because she wasn't an intellectual equal like Bertha.
Right. He never took her out to high society events. He kept her entirely hidden from his professional peers.
It sounds like he compartmentalized his heart exactly the way he compartmentalized his volatile chemicals.
It was a messy situation. It dragged on for 18 long years, and it brought him very little actual joy, just a lot of headache, drama, and endless expense.
It probably just reinforced his internal feeling that his only true value to the world was his brain and his wallet, not his actual person.
Which is why there's a specific quote from the source material that really stands out to me. He said, "If I have 1,000 ideas and only one turns out to be good, I am satisfied."
You know, applying that quote to his love life versus his scientific life is telling. He had all these ideas, these attempts at connection, but he probably felt only his explosive work actually turned out good.
Which brings us right back to that hotel room in Cannes in 1888. The obituary.
The Merchant of Death.
You really have to understand the political context of the French press at that time. They were becoming very, very critical of the European arms race.
And here they had the king of dynamite served up on a platter.
Exactly. The obituary straight up accused him of becoming incredibly rich by finding ways to mutilate and kill masses of people.
It completely stripped away his intellectual deterrence argument. The world didn't see a complex scientist trying to end his war. They just saw a greedy profiteer.
And it shattered him. Alfred Nobel was quietly obsessed with his legacy. Remember, deep down, he always wanted to be a poet.
Right. He wanted to be a cultured man of letters.
So to realize he would be remembered as a blood-soaked industrialist was his absolute worst nightmare.
So he decides right then to rewrite the ending of his life. But he doesn't actually do it immediately, does he?
No, the idea gestates for a few years. He spends the last years of his life living in San Remo, Italy. He's very sick. He's suffering from severe angina.
And the irony of his medical treatment is just unbelievable.
His doctor actually prescribed him nitroglycerin for his heart condition.
Wait, really? The explosive?
Yes, nitroglycerin is a potent vasodilator. It relaxes and opens up the blood vessels to improve blood flow to the heart.
That is incredible.
But Alfred flatly refused to take it. He told them, they call it trinitrin, to avoid scaring the pharmacists and the patients, but I know exactly what it is.
He found it completely absurd that the very substance that made him rich and ruined his reputation was now supposed to save his failing heart.
So, knowing his time is short, on November 27th, 1895, at the Swedish-Norwegian Club over in Paris, he sits down and signs his last will and testament.
He had drafted several wills before this, but this was the final definitive draft, and it was an absolute shocker to everyone.
He left 94% of his total verifiable assets. We're talking about 31 million Swedish kroner.
Which translates to hundreds of millions of dollars in today's money.
Just a massive fortune. And he left it all to establish an international prize fund.
To honor eminent personalities. And he specified 5 distinct categories: physics, chemistry, and medicine. Which, those are obvious. He's a man of science.
Right. Those prizes reward the concrete understanding of the natural world.
Then there is the literature prize.
That is strictly for the poet he never got to be. And note the specific criteria in the will. He wanted to reward the most outstanding work in an ideal direction.
He wanted literature that morally elevated humanity. He was likely pushing back against the bleak, cynical realism that was so popular in literature at the time.
And finally, the 5th category, the Peace Prize.
The most controversial one by far, the explosive maker funding a peace prize.
And I think we can securely credit Bertha von Suttner for this specific inclusion. She didn't manage to convince him to stop making bombs while he was alive, but she convinced him that peace was something that had to be actively engineered and constructed, just like one of his bridges or tunnels.
It's an interesting historical footnote that the Peace Prize is specifically awarded in Oslo, Norway, while all the other scientific and literary prizes are handed out in Stockholm, Sweden.
Nobel actually never explained why he structured it that way in his will, but the historical theories are really fascinating.
What's the main theory?
Well, Norway and Sweden were in a political union at the time, but Norway was aggressively pushing for independence. Some historians think Nobel was trying to use the prestige of the prize to foster cooperation and keep the two countries together, like a final posthumous act of diplomacy.
Oh, that makes sense.
Others just think he felt the Norwegian parliament was fundamentally less corruptible than the Swedish political circles he knew so well.
So he signs this monumental will, puts it away in a bank vault, and then he dies just about a year later, December 10th, 1896.
And he was completely alone. He had suffered a severe stroke. He couldn't speak his native Swedish clearly anymore, and his Italian servants in San Remo didn't understand what he was trying to say.
That is profoundly tragic.
He died surrounded by his immense wealth, but entirely without his family or friends.
And then, as soon as he dies, the real chaos started. I think we all just assume the Nobel Prize cleanly appeared out of thin air. But his own family fought the will tooth and nail, right?
Oh, it was an all-out legal war. His brother's children were absolutely furious. They had effectively been entirely disinherited from a global empire.
Even the King of Sweden got involved.
King Oscar II was deeply offended. He thought it was highly unpatriotic for Nobel to send all this Swedish money out of the country to foreigners. He demanded that the prizes be strictly limited to Swedes.
But the executors of the will fought back. Particularly a young engineer named Ragnar Solman. He fought relentlessly to honor Alfred's final wishes.
Solman is really the unsung hero of the Nobel Prize. He literally rode in a horse-drawn carriage with a loaded gun sitting on his lap, physically transporting Nobel's financial securities from Paris banks to Stockholm.
Just to make sure the French government couldn't seize the assets for tax purposes?
Exactly. It took 5 grueling years of international legal wrestling before the very first prizes were finally awarded in 1901.
And looking back on it now, over a century later, did it work?
You mean, did he successfully redeem himself?
Yeah. I mean, when we say the word Nobel today, we immediately think of Albert Einstein, Martin Luther King Jr., Marie Curie. We definitely don't think of blown-up mine shafts and battlefield casualties.
But yes, it absolutely worked. It is undeniably the most successful legacy pivot in human history.
It really is.
But I think it's deeper than just a clever PR stunt. I think Nobel fundamentally realized at the end that science itself is neutral. Nitroglycerin can blow up a civilian bridge, or it can safely dig a vital tunnel. It can kill a soldier, or it can treat a man's heart condition.
The intention behind the tool is what actually matters.
Precisely. The prize was his way of trying to permanently bias the scale of human endeavor toward the constructive rather than the destructive.
He used the vast fortune of death to fund the ultimate celebration of human life.
That is the core paradox of Alfred Nobel. And perhaps that's exactly why the prize carries so much immense weight today. It's not just a lot of money. It's literal blood money that has been washed clean by aligning it with the highest aspirations of our species.
It really makes you sit back and think about the whole concept of a legacy. Most of us don't have 31 million kroner to leave behind to change our public image. But we all have a narrative.
We do. Nobel had the terrifying, unique privilege of reading his own ending before he died. And he didn't like what he saw, so he used everything he had to change the plot.
And that leads us to the thought we want to leave you with today. It's a bit of a challenge for you to mull over.
If you were to Google yourself in 50 years, or if you were somehow able to see your own obituary printed tomorrow morning, what is the headline going to say?
Is it the headline you actually want? And if it isn't, remember that you are still the one holding the pen. You can still rewrite it. Alfred Nobel proves that it is literally never too late to completely change what your name stands for in this world.
Even if the world already knows you as the Merchant of Death.
Thanks for listening to this deep dive. We'll catch you on the next one.